All right. Sorry about that. We had a little glitch getting going. Bam. Do it, Boone.
This is Big Bad Boone Cutler, and you're watching the Break It Down show.
That's right. This is going to be awesome. I've really been looking forward to doing this. So, just so you all know, look, not a lot of shows have this ability, and I'm going to chop it up here, and I'm gonna toot some horns here, right? Boone's a bad motherfucker. Boone has deployed. He's been blowed the fuck up. I have to. We have done this stuff on the ground, and when we talk about Afghanistan and Iraq and now Ukraine, we're talking from a point of view of experience. So when you see talking heads on the news, that's great, man. And maybe they go and they embed, but they didn't do it day in day out. They didn't put their lives on the line. Now you put it in people like Boone's in my world. We didn't sit behind desks. We went outside every damn day. We tried to figure out how to do what we did. And in our worlds, Boone's in our worlds, we work like this all the time. I don't get to go out of the gate by myself very often, very rarely. And that's for a good reason. It's dangerous as hell to do it. So how do I get extra manpower to go out? I talk to civil affairs. I talk to psychological operations because those guys need to go out and we work akin so often that I know guys like Boone. I know all kinds of psychological operations people and we work similarly. So I have huge respect for what these guys do. I try to stay out of their way. Only thing I ever try to do is like try to find out if I can help them get adjacent to their information to help them confirm or deny what they think they know about their stuff. So enormous respect for what these guys do because it's dangerous. It's not easy. It's complex. They've got so much oversight. And so when I bring someone like Boone in, I'm not bringing Boone in to be gentle. I'm bringing Boone in to be bad, to tell us what we're looking at day to day. Because when I look at the stuff that's going on in Russia, in Ukraine, and how that gets reported in the American press, European press, big difference. Al Jazeera and what they say, you see a lot of different stories being told. And so we're going to look at some of these stories live in real time. I'm going to read some of this news, and you all are going to hear Boone go, "Stop, Pete, shut up. I got something to say." I'm going to tell you what's being said because you know who writes news? Boone does. So that's me telling you the premise of this and understand why I have Boone here talking because he is a ground truth expert in this. And this is all of this stuff that he has absolutely, like I can't tell you how good he is at this stuff. So Boone, I'm going to give you the floor to talk about this, and then we're going to get our hands dirty. We're going to look at this news, and you're going to tell me what you think.
Thank you, brother. I appreciate it, man. And I will dovetail into that and say, you know, when PSYOP and with Intel, when we work together, it's such a beautiful thing because for one, I can't tell all the impact indicators that are going to come back around after I do my operations if I'm not talking to the intel side. So there's so much hand in glove that we do. And also when we're out there, I mean, PSYOP is two-way intel. I'm making sure I'm putting stuff out, and I want to see who gets a hold of it and what they do with it and where it goes and who's collecting on the other side when it comes back in. Because when you see those lines of communication coming, full circle, you're like, okay, now I got something. Now I got message and theme that I can really capitalize on, and I've captivated a target audience that is going to permeate what I'm saying, what I'm doing, the campaigns that we're pushing out. And we can't do that without the intel side. So it is so close. I mean, it really is hand in glove. So thank you for putting that out there. A lot of people just don't know it.
Right. And look, respect to all the reporters out there, especially embedded reporters. I'm a little unfair to those guys sometimes. They're doing their best, but there is a difference between being out there day in, day out, meeting the sheikhs, meeting the elders, meeting the governmental people, and trying to in real time work with these guys and get these messages to go out. It is really hard to do. Now you put it in the modern context of a reporter, someone working for AP News, someone working for Reuters, someone working for any news organization. Look, reporters got to eat. And if someone comes along with a sack of money, let me tell you something, reporters got to eat. And it's not hard to find someone who will write something for someone or put your op-ed piece up front and center to include any magazine, any newspaper in the world.
And sometimes those news agencies don't want the information that they're getting. I'll give you, this is a real world story, truly happened. We had a reporter come in, I forget which agency he was with, but it was, I get a call from the old man. The old man says, "Hey, go out with this guy. I want you to shadow him. And you're going to get a President's Patrol, Solder City. You give him a good look of it." And I said, "In the daytime?" He's like, "Yeah, in the daytime." It's okay, no problem. I get it. And so we go out and we do the, stop by the schools and, look at all the nice stuff, give them something to report on. And I get this wild hair and I say, hey, man, you want to see what's really going on? Come out with me tonight. I'll get a patrol. We'll go out tonight and I'll show you stuff, what's really going on. Because he told me, he said that the reason for his article was to show the tacit, what do you say, the tacit relationship between the United States and Muqtada al-Sadr. And I said, I don't think you're getting the whole story here. I said, you want a real story? I'll take you out tonight. So I got on a patrol. I took him out that night. I took him out to this one place that we had. It was a tall building. I think it was the tallest building in Sadr City. And I said, okay, now look, we got the binos out. I said, right there's a U.S. patrol. Watch the U.S. patrol. Now look to the road, to the north, to the south, to the east, to the west. What do you see? He says, I see Iraqi police. I said, that's right. Everywhere we go inside this town, we're shadowed by Iraqi police. They're the ones doing surveillance on us. So when we get hit, it comes from them. You understand? He goes, yeah, I understand. Okay, now let's go to another place. We go out to the hospital. I have this trusted relationship with people at the hospital that I had nurtured, and it's really good. They're feeding me all kinds of stuff because you want to know hospitals and morgues have a tremendous amount of information for PSYOPers because the people that you are working with, sometimes they end up those places. And they disappear, but they still end up in those places. And you need to find out where they at, what happened to them. And the sad thing is, if they did get murdered, in which way were they murdered? Because there's certain people that do kind of like signature killings. And so it pins it on a certain person. So this is another way to track your impact indicators. So I take them out to the hospital, to these doctors, and the doctors say, no, we don't have medication. All the medication goes to the militia. The people don't get care. Just the militia gets care. And this guy's eyes are, as big as saucers. And then we kick him loose. And I'm waiting and waiting. That article never got written, brother. If it did, it never got published.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't like that story. I often say that the embedded reporters are there for their story, not the story. And that's just how it works. And look, I don't want to talk too much because we have a lot of ground to cover already as it is. So let's do one of the things I want to point out. I'm just going to share this on my screen here, and everybody give me a second here to try to drive this train proper. So let me just focus here on a second and share screen. Hang on, let me share this. All right, so there's this think tank called the Atlantic Council. They're very critical of a number of Ukrainian oligarchs, right? And we've been talking a lot about oligarchs on here, Boone, and how it's a bit of a bullshit term because they, look, it's regional. And one of the things, I'm going to say this out loud, one of the things, the media is often left-leaning, which is fair, right? And they don't like billionaires. They don't like successful business people. They want things to be more governmentally focused. That's just ideologically based. That's just how they're wired. So look, fair enough, right? But when you have successful business people and they're good at running the country, that's sometimes good for the country. In Iraq, we pulled all the successful business people out and said, get out of here. We hate Baathists. And they're like, but I graduated from the London School of Economics. Fuck you. You're a Baathist. Go home. They're like, all right, then I'm leaving. So they took their money and they took their capability with them and they left or they died or did whatever. And so we have these problems. And so a lot of these things are, I hate to say ideological, but they're ideological in terms of the people that write the news, right? And then you have think tanks that are funded by, okay, and I'm showing you guys this. For example, Chevron, funds the Atlantic Council, right? That's kind of weird. And these are oil and gas people, right? But here is, let's see, the very top of the list here. So you got $1 million and above, right? You have, first off, you have this Facebook on there. One of the names up top is Anonymous, which, okay, great. Right there's Anonymous. And then Victor Pinchuk. You know who Victor Pinchuk is? The second biggest oligarch in, guess where? Ukraine. And then hidden in these with a name, and I'll see if I can figure out which one it is here. And it's not ENISPA, but it's one of these kind of things. And I'll find out exactly which one it is here. I've got it in my notes. Maybe it's GSEPS, is the biggest oligarch in all of Ukraine. So I want you to keep that in mind. By the way, there's Blackstone Charitable Foundation, right? So all of these things. Oh, look, Burisma, British Petroleum. These are the people that contribute to this organization that writes a lot of things that are negative about oil and gas oligarchs in Ukraine. All right, so keep that in mind, right? So we want to think about who benefits and then who's writing the papers. Okay, so that's just a little point of contention. All right, so let me scooch over here to this this piece here. Okay, so written by Diane Francis. Guess who Diane Francis writes for, Boone? Look at
Tell
that.
me.
I'm going to tell you right now. I'm going to share this tab instead. Look at the top corner of this. It says Atlantic Council. Time to cut out the middlemen in Ukrainian gas trade. Now, granted, this is from several years ago, right? But this is the same organization, and you have this industrialist, and you got the picture. Okay, so 4 years ago, Ukrainian protested the streets that against jaw dropping. So I'll tell you right now, anytime I see something like jaw dropping or any kind of big word in front of corruption or any
Loaded language is what we call it in my world. Loaded language.
yeah. So continues to siphon billions from Ukraine. These proceeds underwrite a sophisticated bribery scheme in Russia and Ukraine, and more recently helped subsidize Russia's war and occupation against Ukraine. Now, keep in mind, this story is from 2018, but I think the lesson here holds. The heist was devised years ago by mafia kingpin Simeon Moglevich, and he has been fronted by Dmitry Firtash with the blessing of Russian President Vladimir Putin and his insiders. It was simple. A foreign intermediary company was established to buy gas from Gazprom, then sell it to Ukraine's utility Naftogaz for huge profits that would then be diverted to Russia and Ukrainian politicians and officials. And I will just say, I don't know if you can see this because it's kind of small on your end. There is not one reference in that story written by this think tank, right? Not one reference. The offshore intermediary was dismantled in 2016, but Firtash immediately devised another gambit. He now controls zombie intermediaries or regional gas distribution companies inside Ukraine that Naftogaz is legally obliged to sell 11 billion cubic meters of gas, about 1/3 of the market, at prices that are 50% below market. Worse, the most of these zombie never pay for the gas, and Naftogaz can't collect the bad debts in timely fashion or cut the gas supplies. Now, look, any of these things might be true, right? But there's no references anywhere in here. There's nothing linked to take you anywhere else. And so we don't know. And there's the story continues, and there's more charges. And anybody should link this, and I'll put this in here, the links into the show notes. Firtash fled Ukraine in 2014 and is in Vienna fending off extradition charges to the U.S. regarding a $500 million bribery scheme involving titanium in India. He may come up again later on one of these other stories. The extradition was dismissed by the Vienna judge in 2015, and then upheld in 2015, and then delayed, and then another extradition request was. So this whole thing is a circuitous thing. So I guess the point here is you have oligarchs funding a also funded by Burisma, BP, Chevron think tank that writes this story. What does this tell you when you see this kind of a story when you're targeting gas executives? And you have all this stuff, and there's, I don't know, what do you see in this? Do you want me to read more? Do you have enough?
No, I see a shaping operation. I mean, at the end of the day, they're shaping to create the bad guy, the good guy. You have to have a protagonist and an antagonist. This is going after the antagonist. And for anybody who wants to know how the world really works, I hate to say it, but go watch The Godfather, because there's so many things in there about getting rid of your competition, about so on and so forth, about bribing people, about making people look bad, about how using reporters to sell a certain story that you want to sell. There's so many things in there that are are so right on, but you don't want to think about it that way because it's a story about the mob, or at least a mob family. But really, there's a lot of truths in that whole series, except for part three. Part three is a little funky, but for the most part, there's a lot of truth in one and two about how the world works. And I just think people should pay attention to it. When I see people naming people and using this loaded language, and then you turn back and you say, okay, who is funding this particular publication? Well, then you have a product, right? You have a product that people are selling to create some sort of frame of reference. That's what we call that frame of reference for certain people. And who knows what came out after this? Like, I would be curious to find, if we did any searches, like, did that guy ever get extradited, or is he still there? And if he hasn't been extradited, why hasn't he been extradited? Because there's nothing on him, And so they basically just keep the guy pinned down, make a lot of accusations, which we've seen, in our own country with FISA and different things like that. It's the same game, only the players change.
It's funny. There's actually a story with that particular dude in it, and they talk about him being a fugitive. Now that he becomes just one line. So instead of that back and forth of it was, extradited, then canceled, and so there is this legal struggle that if you look for it, you can find it. But it's just easier just to say he's a fugitive, And so they take all of that stuff where there's this legal fight that's been going on, Boone, for 10 years. 10 years to extradite a guy who's apparently corrupt. Maybe he is, right? We just don't know. But here's the thing: is Austria's like, hey, man, doesn't look like it to us, right? And there's a couple of times when they said it's, and I can find you a case, but we're not looking to prove this case right now. But one of the arguments is like Austria is saying this is political, so we're not going to pursue it. He's been released at points during this thing because they're like, this is political. So you're right. There is secondary, tertiary, quintiary, on down points in this case. So this case is still in the Vienna court in some point where I believe the last time I saw an update, and again, I don't know exactly where it's at, but they were going to start the whole thing over again, and they were going to look at it and see where it's at. And we are talking 10 years later, right? So if this is such a cut and dry thing, any reporter who's being legitimate, and I've got a mass comm degree, you'd say this is alleged and it's gone on for 10 years. And so we don't really know where this is going to, you would have to put some doubt because we don't know.
At a minimum, though, I mean, look at this particular operation. This guy's in Vienna. He's not doing the work he was doing. He's been neutralized. Okay. Yeah. And that's, I think, a big part of it. Like, okay, you can't get him, you can't prosecute him, can't get him extradited, but you can at least use lawfare, which we need to talk about, lawfare, using the law as warfare. Look at the lawfare involved here. Yeah. This is a big deal. Get the guy neutralized so somebody else can slide into his place.
Let's look again at the Atlantic Council, because I think they're another good example here. And that's great. Like, so this is exactly what I wanted from you. All right, let's look at the Atlantic Council again, and let's look at Fred Kemp, one of the prime people over there. And I'm picking on the Atlantic Council because they're one. But like these think tanks, this is what they do. All right, so let me share this thing. Stand by. Okay, and I just got to pick the right one here. I think this is it. Yeah. Okay. So this is an op-ed by Frederick Kemp. He guess who he works for? Just guess, Boone.
Somebody who doesn't like the people that he's going to write about.
Yeah, he works for the Atlantic Council, so he actually likes these guys. Making a case for an oil CEO, Sultan Al-Jaber, to lead the UN climate conference this year. So he's making a case for Al-Jaber, the CEO Sultan, and he wants him to lead the UN climate conference this year. And this is from January of 2023. Key points. Some climate activists were against when the UAE announced that the CEO of the Abu Dhabi National Oil Company as president of this year's COP28. The UAE will host the 28th UN climate change conference at the end of 2023. And what the outrage overlooks is Sultan Al-Jaber's rich background in both renewables and fossil fuels, which makes him an ideal choice. And so this is basically an op-ed. So in Abu Dhabi, if the world gets lucky, this could be the year fossil fuel producers and climate activists bury the hatchet and join hands to reduce emissions and ensure our planet's future. If that sounds hopelessly utopian, let's take that up with the leaders of this resource-rich, renewables generating Middle Eastern monarchy. The United Arab Emirates is determined to inject specificity, urgency, and pragmatism into the process that often has lacked all three. The 28th convening of the United Nations Climate Change Conference, known as COP28, which the UAE will host from November 30th to December 12th to kick off the 2023 oil and gas climate change. Okay, so this goes on for a while. And so they go on and they say, thanks to Russian President Vladimir Putin's criminal war in Ukraine and his ongoing weaponization of energy for injecting a new dose of hard-headed reality to the climate conversation, it's seldom been so clear that energy security and cleaner energy are indivisible. The guiding principle is the energy sustainable trilemma, defined as needing to balance energy, reliable, affordable, and sustainable. All right, so I just want to press pause there and get any thoughts with you on what you hear from Mr. Kemp as he writes about the conference and the sheikh who's in charge of UAE's efforts.
Oh, he's saying Jabbar is the guy that's going to carry the water. You know, he's the guy, he's their boy. They're propping him up. He's going to be, and so they're backfilling the SEO. And that's very, very important, especially in today's digital space when you're conducting psychological operations. You always want to backfill the SEO. What's the date on this article?
It is January 2023.
Okay. I would be curious to see since then, or in the very near future, where something happens that's a little bit controversial, right? Because he's balancing fossil fuels and the climate change folks. And so I would guess that at some point in time, he's going to hit something that's controversial, and therefore they're expecting it. So you want to backfill the SEO with a whole bunch of positive things about your guy. So when people attack him because they're planning on doing something controversial, they can go, no, this is a good guy. Look at all the information that's been written about him. It's backfilling the SEO. That's doctrine and technique. And I think it's important to talk to the people watching is that we're not talking about who's right, who's wrong, and good, bad, and everything. We're talking about technique here. This is technique. Everybody does this. There is no good guy, bad guy when it comes to these techniques. Literally, everybody does it in order to be effective. So
this is done on the 14th of January. My birthday is the 17th of January, and on that day, there is a story that's dropped. Let's read this story. So we are now looking at, from the Washington Free Beacon, a story written by Chuck Ross, and he writes, headline, the UAE has donated millions to the Atlantic Council. They just got a glowing op-ed from the think tank's chief. Guess who? Fred Kemp. And he did not disclose millions in Emirati funding in a gushing article. And so then he goes on to break down all of this, renewable generating stuff. And he talks on and on about, the article, the op-ed that was written. And so we could read that whole thing, but here it is 3 days later. So we have this, look, I'm going to come back to you now and I'm going to stop sharing because I think we could talk about this for a few moments here. If you're going to do an advertorial, right, you have to say, in all openness, we just received millions of dollars from UAE. In spite of that, I want to tell you about why I think these guys have a vision for the future. Right. Now, let me clear my throat. And I'm going to put this guy's dick in my mouth, right? That's what you have to do. And look, you can do that, right? You can legitimately say, look, we are in the business of raising money because we want to do the right things, and these guys contribute to us. But you have to say it, right? And one of the things that oligarchs hate is transparency. This guy just did something that wasn't transparent. So who's the oligarch?
Exactly. Who's the oligarch and who is, somebody's paying somebody. That's just the way things work. The world runs on money, and this guy's being set up. He's being propped up, and they're not even, they are trying to hide. They're trying to hide the fact of where they're getting their funds from. And this is, I guarantee you, when those people call and they say, hey, can you do an article on so-and-so? Or it isn't even like that. It's like they write the op-ed, send it over to the guy. He puts his name on it and it gets published. That whole Jabbar, probably one of his people, probably wrote that article.
Yeah, you're probably right about that, right? Yeah.
I mean, that's how I do it. Isn't that how you do it?
Yeah, I mean, I'd want, if I spent millions of dollars, I'd definitely want control over the words that are going to be written,
Yeah.
And so, yeah, it's interesting.
It's like a lobbyist writing the bill for the bill they want passed to help who they're lobbying for. It's the same game. It's always the same game.
Right. Yeah, it is the same game. And when you look at these different stories, so okay, let's back up. So in general, when we talk about all of these operations that happen, okay, I want to be fair, right? I want to be fair and talk about Ukraine is a corrupt place, and we can I can pull up all kinds of articles where, depending on who you talk to, depends upon how corrupt Ukraine is. The fact is that if it's binary, is Ukraine corrupt or not? You would have to say today, Ukraine is a corrupt place, right? Are they getting better? Maybe, right? They're doing things to try to get better. Are they corrupt? Yes.
It does change the fact they're corrupt, and they're all corrupt. I think one country pointing the finger at another country saying you're corrupt is really a joke. That's not even. I know there's a moral higher ground that they're trying to build their audience around and motivate their people, saying we're better than they are. They deserve this. We're the good people. They're the bad people. And that whole dichotomy. But it's I think people aren't fooled anymore. It's levels of corruptness. And at the end of the day, is it about right or wrong, or is it about objectives? I think more than not, it's always about objectives.
Right. One of the things that we've been exploring, and I'm going to get a little bit off topic, but I think it's important because we're talking about the oligarch thing. So we're on the topic, but when we start to remove people from the game, right? We talked about this first guy earlier, and we're removing him from the game with the words that the article is using. And if that person says, I've denounced Putin, I've said I'm Ukrainian to the core, I want to help. Look at our own past, right? And we've on the show we've talked about this quite a bit. Carnegie, Mellon, all of these captains of industry, they invested in the country in times of war and in times of peace. And as time went on, there was less and less industrialism, more things like using your brain to make money. There aren't that many people making steel in the United States anymore. But when we needed their help financially, when we needed their industrial might, man, we had it, right? But we seem to forget that when it comes to a place like Ukraine, and we want to remove these people because of a past that we don't like or don't understand or don't bother to understand. And so we want to remove these characters out because they were at one point Russians, or they're
not our people.
Right.
That's the thing. They're not our people. If we're going to have somebody corrupt in there, we want our corrupt guy in there. I think that's the right way to put it.
Yeah, that guy Pinchuk, who gives money to the Atlantic Council, he's famous for cutting checks to American pop artists. And great, right? But you and I, we've seen this in Iraq, right? The guy that wears the right kind of suit and speaks English, he gets the money.
Mm-hmm.
And the sheikh that's like, hey, man, I got wives, I got problems, I got things to do. I don't got to talk to you. I don't need your problem in my life, right? And so we don't like that guy. He becomes a problem. And you know what we do on the Army side, at least the Army side, I don't speak to that specifically, we want to kill that guy. I mean, legitimately, like, that guy's a problem. He's not nice to us. He doesn't ever, he waves at us and he goes like, get out of here. And we're like, oh, that guy hates us. And so we literally, like, how do we kill this guy? We'll listen to his phone calls and we'll decide that he's a bad dude, no matter if he's a bad dude or not, right? And so what I know about us as a country is that once we decide a billionaire, a millionaire, a businessman is a bad person, and we start writing bad stories, the story only goes in one direction. It doesn't ever allow that person to say, but I'm a Ukrainian. I want to help. I'm desperate to do this. We don't let that happen. I can't find anybody that can name a billionaire in Ukraine who's an established person, not some person who's like, I work in computers and tech. I can't find anybody that can tell me a billionaire in Ukraine who's worth a damn.
Brother, at the end of the day, there's always a pecking order. There's always a pecking order. And the goal is always to get the most amount of your people to the top of that pecking order, whether corrupt, otherwise. If they've got the skills and if they've got a loyalty to you, you push them forward, you push them up. And in order to do that, you have to create space. And so if you've got somebody in that pecking order that's not your guy, that person's getting pulled down, period, in the story. They're going to be replaced. You're going to create the vacuum. You're going to consume the vacuum with your own people.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. So when we think about the news and we want to look at a country that struggles. So a thing that happened recently was in Ukraine, their chief justice of their Supreme Court was put in jail because he had a suitcase full of money and plans allegedly to distribute it to other judges as well. And I can pull the story up and we can read that and we can look at that.
Well, we both know what that's all about.
Tell us what that's about.
He's the guy who is the conduit for somebody else to get people paid off. They probably got him on the hook, in some way, whether it's a honeypot, whether it's in some way he's been compromised. And his goal is to determine, his job is to say, okay, who else around here is susceptible, and what do they need to get in this boat? First, you're going to always try and pay people, right? That's the easiest thing. Get them hooked on the money, and that's what that's all about. This guy had been compromised. And this is my guess. And I think it's a pretty good guess from a lot of knowledge. But this guy had been compromised, and he is a trusted source to other people that you want to be a trusted source. And so you got trusted source to trusted source. He makes the deals. He does the drop, and then nobody else has to get their hands dirty, or he's just completely set up, which I don't know.
Yeah, I don't either. Do you trust that?
Do I trust which? Do I trust that? Do I trust that technique? Yeah, I trust that technique.
Yeah, either one. You tell me.
We'd have to, in order to determine that, we'd have to look at the information that's being put out on this person prior to that incident. We'd have to look at what this person was also involved in, and we'd have to do some sort of link diagram to figure out who they're associated with, and then it would become very, very clear.
All right, so we got to wait and see then.
I think we have to wait and see.
Do you think we'll see reporting if it goes against the narrative?
No.
Okay. Right?
No.
Yeah.
No.
All right.
The media is controlled. The media doesn't exist anymore. And this is why, I've been saying, and we've actually been writing about it. Media is no longer trusted. Media has become psyop factories. If people want to know the truth, there's so many ways to find people in the areas and regions where people are. You can find somebody and ask them. There are online translators. There's all kinds of stuff. People are connected. So I think there's going to be in the very, very near future where if I'm looking for information in the area that you live in, Pete, I'm going to find a guy. I'm going to find you, and I'm going to say, hey, man, can you look out your door right now and tell me what's going on? And just tell me, man to man, what's going on? And I'm going to get the ground truth. I'm not going to get any spin. It's just dude to dude. And I think you're going to see the news per se turn more into that peer-to-peer relationship over the near future. That it's going to be shocking to people. And I think it comes from a lot of podcasters. I think it comes from people who are they don't know what else to do. They're tired of being circle jerked, and they're going to start realizing that, if I want to know what's going on, how hard would it be for me to reach out to an Uber driver? And let's say St. Louis, Missouri, say something happens in St. Louis, Missouri, and there's all kinds of news coming in or wherever, all kinds of news coming in, and it's so confusing. How hard would it be to just get an Uber driver to drive to the place where something is happening and say, hey, do me a favor, take out your phone, do a quick 360 with the video and send it to me. And then just tell me what you see. Just tell me what you see. And if they're like, hey, nothing's happening here, there's like 10 people, there's not 1,000 people, and they don't look like they want to be here for very long. And I heard 3 of them say they were getting paid $40 an hour this time. Okay, thank you very much. You know, I mean, I think we're going to get to that point as not just an American society, but I think as people around the world, because we're just not buying the bullshit anymore. They just don't know how to get out of the bullshit. But as soon as these techniques and these strategies are put out more and more and more to people through great shows like yourselves, I think that's what you're going to see.
When you see a story and look at, like, there's even more ability to fake something, right? So the loaded language, the one-sided reporting, like this person is corrupt, this person
Selective
is
information,
this, right. But now also, like, you might be phony, right? You're sitting in this dark room with your dark glasses on, you know. I could be a deep fake. I'm a robot, right? I mean, now all these things could be going on. We don't know how many bodies there are out there. Neither side wants to tell the truth. You know, you've got this writer's strike and musicians complaining about the accounting in the music industry, and nobody wants to say, like, everybody's like, I'm broke. Everybody's broke in these strikes, right? So how do we even know? Like, some taxi driver, you just hire enough taxi drivers to be like, yeah, we have this reporting network of taxi drivers. Do you want our source? We have ground truth news. All bullshit.
It could definitely be. Yeah, all bullshit.
Right. Yeah, I don't know what we do about that. Let me bring this to you in another way. So, and I agree with you. The ground reporting is a way that I think we're going to see this.
And I think the more and more we see synthetic media, you know, that's a phrase people should be really paying attention to. Synthetic media. I just saw an article today. It was put out that the DOD, not the DOD, USASOCOM, okay, is now which we know is PSYOP, okay, that's because of the nature of the work being done, is now using AI to determine what is fake news or fake information to counter it in real time. Now, you're talking about the United States military working in the space. Yes, it's cyberspace, but it's the cyberspace of the United States. Now, if you're not going to tell me we're not at war, well, guess what? We're at war, because that's what that means. And this is going to be an ongoing thing. I was reading, I'll send you the article. You should check it out. But this is going to be an ongoing thing. Now, are they going to be going after black propaganda and some gray, and they're going to neutralize that as it pops up? Or are they going to start selectively selecting what's white? You know, what's your opinion? What's my opinion? You know, then it becomes a difference. I just think it is such a slippery slope at this point that we need to pay attention to. Again, United States military, guys in green uniforms, are now operating in cyberspace within the United States to kill what they call as disinformation. I'm not saying it doesn't need to happen. I think it does need to happen. I think there's a lot of stuff that gets launched in the United States by Russia, by Iran, by the CCP. I've done a lot of reporting on it. And I think there needs to be something. But at the same time, we've played these games before when we were trying to stop a foreign adversary and we started trampling all over the Bill of Rights. You know, where are the safeguards here? And I think we need to really start asking ourselves that right now, because it's a big deal. It's a very big deal. Because if you and I can't share information about our opinion just to have the normal discourse of discussion, then we've got a problem. Because that means everything that is, quote unquote, the approved narrative, if you can't even have a discussion about something unless it's the approved narrative.
Right.
And as a PSYOPer, I know the guys that are doing this. I mean, that was my job. And I think it's a lot of great folks. But at some point in time, if that also becomes corrupt, you know, then where are we really? We're living in a dreamland. Nothing's real.
When we look at things like genocide and atrocities and these kind of things, again, this is filtered through a search engine, which is trying to sell you cat videos and, you know, Tahitian beach, you know, pictures, that kind of stuff. And so if you want to see if there's Russian atrocity or Ukrainian atrocity, even that gets between you and the information that you're looking for. What are your thoughts on just the algorithm, the algorithmic, which has nothing to do with the information operation that's going on, but just all these other secondary things that are going to clog the information? And then what are your sources? You know, like you and I both know, if you get out of the American media market, you get completely different news. And I'm not talking just BBC. I'm talking like legit homeland Al Jazeera, other news sources that are completely different. And how many news sources do you need to check before you're like, yeah, I've got a good handle on this?
Well, you have to understand who their target audience is, right? Who their target audience is, and who are they trying to support, again, to make sure that they're at the top of the pecking order. That's the way that game's always going to be played. It's never going to change. Okay. I just finished a book called How to Fight Artificial Intelligence. It's the Systems Guide to Fifth Generation Warfare, Session 2, How to Fight Artificial Intelligence. And this is the kind of stuff we were talking about. Because in Chapter 3, when you talk about all the ways artificial intelligence is doing what we call AI-driven psychological programming, you're talking about the same stuff we're talking about right here. It's the selective language. It is the loaded language. It is, allowing something to exist, making sure things show up in your feed based upon your data points so you can be manipulated to move in a certain direction. It's very, very intense. And all this stuff is being done with artificial intelligence. We are at a place right now where people are looking at AI as robots and all these other things. Let me give you another example. Earlier this year, there was a deep fake that went out about with the and this is probably one of the things that stemmed this, or started this, but what I was talking about with the DoD. But there was a deep fake about an explosion at the Pentagon, and what were the effects of that? That it was one deep fake. It wasn't multiple angles. People didn't think about it. It looked like it came from a trusted source, Huffington something or other. And then what happened? The stock market dropped. And then you have to ask yourself, okay, who bought the dip, right? Because was it set up for that reason, so someone could just make money on the dip? Was it set up for other reasons? But a tremendous amount of people bought that as real, and they responded to it. And that was something that, quite honestly, was not that technologically advanced. It's pretty simple. And what is going to happen next? AI-driven psychological programming. I encourage everybody to start looking into that, because it affects literally every human being that looks at a screen.
Yeah. Wow. That's powerful, man. You think you have a handle on these things, and then all of a sudden you realize it's just moving so fast, right? It's overwhelming.
And we don't have a whole lot of time. See, humans are a beautiful species. We sooner or later, we kind of figure it out. There's a lot of push and pull and push and pull and push and pull, but we figure it out. But now what happens, we have something that it speeds up the manipulation so fast that there is no push and pull. It's completely contrived and controlled from the cognitive battle space. I mean, just the fact we have U.S. military deployed in cyberspace. They're not trying to control cyberspace. That's false. They're not controlling cyberspace. They're controlling the cognitive battle space. They're protecting, or they're doing something to modify the cognitive battle space so it can be not corrupted, or at least corrupted in a way that is deemed appropriate.
Let me that's disheartening. We've had some really bad news this week.
Brother, I have not seen you just like, I got nothing.
Well, I mean,
it's like filling my mind right now.
You got to understand.
It will blow your mind. It will blow
the other
your
day
mind.
we had yesterday we had Calder Walton on the show, and he wrote a book about spies and like the interaction between the East and West, and he had some amazing pieces of the puzzle. He's a historian, right? And he's like as good as you can be, and he got to go through not only like the logbooks and the cables and all this stuff, but in particular, he got to go through all this stuff for the Cuban Missile Crisis. And then he got to talk to the dudes that were left who were still alive. And he got to see it the way that no one else in history has been able to see it. All the different pieces as they locked in, the real-time intel that was coming in, the sources that we all got lucky to have in place, the Russians that they got lucky to have in place. And as we were informing each other through all these different sources, and as Khrushchev and Kennedy were staring each other down, he's like, we got lucky to not incinerate the world. He's like, we got lucky. If we did that again, I don't know that it all would have happened in the right sequence. He's like, we got so lucky. And he's, and then when he looks at like the pattern of Russia, the pattern of Putin, he's like, I just don't see a way out today. And so you just start thinking about this and you think about the patterns this historian sees. And look, maybe he's a negative Nancy, but you just see that, and then you see just how much we're losing control of information, and how angry people get. I was talking to people on Twitter about baseball, and they're like, "You're an imbecile," and I'm like, "Hey, man, I am not an imbecile. You don't start there. You start with, hey, I disagree with you on this. Here's a data point maybe you missed, or something like that." And you're like, "Oh, you know what? That's fair. Yeah, here's a data point that I think counters that, right?" But you start with, over baseball, you're an imbecile. And so that's what like really concerns me, is it just gets heavy, right? When you look at all these things. And there's this, so I'm going to bring it back to the Ukraine thing. And look, I want Ukraine to do well, right? And when I'm critical, and this has always been my thing in my career, is I look at us, the US, because we bring in stability, and we get in the way of things that work. And we don't seem to learn our lessons. And I'm going to ask you in a minute here, like, what do we do different? But like, we have this thing in Ukraine called the Dharma, and they seize assets from people that have done wrong, and then they don't follow through with anything, and it looks like this corrupt organization, because it traditionally sort of has been a problematic organization, and now they've put this person in charge of it that seems to have this checkered past. There's all kinds of stories. I was going to go through that stuff with you, but forget that. We're past that point in the show now. And so you see like these things that aren't right. How did that lady get the job? Who knows? Maybe she wrote a paper. Maybe she knows the right person, but she's got that job now. And if you seize the wrong assets too many times, if you hem the machine up too much, if you disallow the right business person from doing the right thing, having the right, somebody has to have the economic vision to push Ukraine forward. And it can't all be, it's got to be like a complex thing. It's got to be like railroads and this and that and industry. It can't just be like, windmills. It can't just be one thing. It's got to be complex. And I'm afraid that we hate that too much, and that we won't allow Ukraine to pick itself up and be part of that community. I'm afraid that we're going to beat up Russia so bad that there won't be a Russia, and that all that nuclear capability is going to get let loose. And so when I get dark and I think about all that stuff, man, I think that we're going to be everybody's worst enemy, and that we won't, we're so desperate. Russia's not that big of a problem, quite frankly.
Basically,
It's
yeah. I mean, based upon what we spent, $50 billion to figure out, they're not that big of a problem.
yeah,
But here's what scares me, and I was just talking to a friend about this. You've got countries locked into this fight. Well, at some point in time, in order to continue that fight, the resources that they currently have are going to deplete. And where are they going to get those resources? Or how are they going to, say Ukraine starts pulling resources from Australia, well, guess what? Russia doesn't have the troops, doesn't have anything else to get into Australia to block, what they're doing. So they're just going to nuke them. You know what I'm saying? They're just going to drop a nuke. That's going to disrupt that supply line into Ukraine. I mean, no different than the United States. I mean, there was a reason why Japan hit the United States. There was a reason. It was about supply. It was about resources.
Yeah.
It wasn't.
There's a reason why Germany started World War II.
There's all these reasons exist, and I think people need to kind of open up their minds that we can do the rah thing, but after a while, troops and armaments start to become depleted, and then they start pulling resources from areas they don't normally pull resources from, other parts of the world, and then that's what spreads the war there. And so the longer this thing goes on, the more likelihood it's going to spread to those other places. And if they don't have the troops and the armaments to go there and do the physical blocking and physical taking, they're going to start dropping big bombs, very, very big bombs. And I think that's definitely on the table. And we need to really, really think about this thing. Like, this thing needs to get chilled the fuck out real quick, because I don't think it's very long before that happens. And meanwhile, you've got the CCP over here going, I love it when you guys deplete each other. That way we don't have to worry about you. You know, what are they doing? What objectives are they going to start seizing because they start seeing opportunities? Because you can't say it won't happen. And I can say that because if you and I were sitting in the same position, we would wait for that weakness and we would go right at it.
Mm-hmm. I'd be down that phone, you know, like, yeah. If I was Putin, I wouldn't get in an airplane, but I definitely would be getting a hold of somebody.
Yeah. It's like, hey, Xi, can you do something? It looks like America's going to start getting involved here.
Yeah.
And then, you got to understand, both of those countries would be better off if the United States was not strong. If the United States was taken out, they would be a lot better off. Yeah. And we have to look at it that way. So when we start thinking about, okay, well, if something happens, people start dropping nukes around the world, so we're going to go protect all these places. Well, we've only got so many people we can put in so many different places. And this is that type of war.
So a couple quick questions. One, people often say that's a psyop. That kind of bugs me because I'm like, it's not a psyop. It's not, you know, it's not like bugs me when they say that. What's the proper term? What do you want people to say instead of saying that's a psyop?
Well, first of all, people have to understand it's not about trickery. It's about campaigns. A psyop is campaign. You're building a campaign to create a change or a frame of reference within a target audience. So, you know, if you're thinking one way, a psychological operation might be conducted in order to get a group or an individual to start thinking another way because attitudes influence behavior. And so psychological operations are always about influencing attitudes to change behavior to support a certain objective.
And if you want to remove somebody, even if that person's a good person or an effective person at doing what they do, and I think a businessman's a great example. How do you take that person out if they're busy doing what they normally do?
Well, I think in the past you used to do a whole lot of killing of people, you know, but now there's DNA and cameras and all kinds of other stuff. And so the way you do it in modern times is you do it with a smear campaign. And that's the assassination. You assassinate through information. And once you do that, then nobody wants to work with them. And you can do it within a population group, too, to create learned helplessness. Once you create the learned helplessness, now they don't want to challenge authority because they think by staying small, it's their best chance of survival. These are all things that work within psychological operations, whether it's groups or individuals.
Once you have that first story that says Boone Cutler is a bad man, how many adjacent stories that self-confirm that story do you need out?
Oh, I think it could spin at any time. You get one group that starts spreading something and a few people start agreeing with it. Well, if you can make that one group the in group and everybody else the out group, people want to join the in group. So you got to be the cool kids, right? If the cool kids are the ones spreading the bad news, the bad information about you, it's really, really, really hard to overcome that.
Yeah. It's that one hyperlink, right? You know, oh, Boone one time. I like to say like you take a dead person like Ben. Like one time I was at a party and Ben Franklin stepped on my toe. He didn't even say he was sorry. That is now a data point to a robot, you know, it's like, even though it's not real, right? And then it's like gets linked in there. Ben Franklin one time stepped on Pete Turner's toe, you know, and like it becomes a real fucking thing.
Say it enough times and it becomes real every time.
That's right. That's right. And then along those lines, you kind of alluded to it, but I want to clarify it. If you are that dude and you're like, hey, man, I'm just out here trying to work, trying to make money, trying to help people out. Everybody needs to work. And all we want to do is go forward and have a bigger, better, in this case, Ukraine. How do you counter that bullshit? I mean, it's bullshit, right? Like, so do you spend your time fighting bullshit? How do you do it so that you can so this is a smear campaign. What do you do?
I think that, well, there are ways to deal with it. I think one way you deal with it is when you call it out as a smear campaign, and that's at least there. And if you don't do it, other people do it for you. And the more people you can do it for you, the better off. The second thing is you go after the people that are going after you in the same way. And you have to disrupt their activities and discredit them. And if someone is putting out a smear campaign, that's very easy to discredit them. And then once they're discredited, they might get a follower here and there, but for the most part, they've fucked themselves and they're just done. You know, it doesn't go anywhere. It doesn't go anywhere unless it's out there in the cyberspace sphere, and someone wants to launch a bigger campaign against you that hasn't yet been discredited, and they pull the information over. And then you could have some issues. You could definitely have some issues. And these things happen. I mean, especially when it's sometimes your own government does it. I mean, I know of very, very specific situations where our own government was smearing people for to disrupt them.
And when you have these kind of smear campaigns and you are trying to overcome it, and then we talk about this locking in, like, here's your dossier in the U.S. Two shop, right? The Intel card. We're like, oh, this guy's tied to the Taliban, right? Like, oh, well, good luck. You're always tied to the Taliban. There's no E4 anywhere to be like, hey, boss, this guy wasn't. I don't see any. I don't.
Are you sure?
Right? Yeah. It's like comical.
The other thing that Americans especially have to kind of understand, when you see these smear campaigns against whatever oligarchs or whatever.
Yeah.
So many Americans don't understand that things are just done differently.
Totally differently. Yeah.
Not everything is done. Like if you're in Iraq, they just do things differently. Anywhere in the Middle East, they just do things differently. It's got nothing to do. I mean, there's nepotism involved. There's side jobs involved. And they're very open about it. It's who has the most to offer, and it's very. I don't want to say pragmatic in a good way, but it's purely pragmatic,
It's funny. We look at nepotism as a bad thing. You're like, wait, you mean he hired someone he knew to do a job that he needed done well? Okay. Makes perfect sense to me. He trusted his son to do, like if you hired like Cutler and Sons, all right. Those guys probably know what they're doing.
It's someone you can trust. It does make sense. But people feel like, oh, the little guy's being excluded because there's a good old boy network happening. Well, those good old boy networks exist for a reason. It's because that's the group, that's the inner circle that people feel like they can trust. Right, wrong, or indifferent, that's the doctrine behind that. That's what's behind that. And I think a lot of people out there, you can call it bad until you're the one that's doing it. And you're like, yeah, but I have to have someone I can trust, because if it doesn't go well, it falls on me. So who am I going to trust? Somebody I've never met before. I got 3 bids and I'm going to pick of the 3 and I don't know anything about them. Whatever. Or I got this guy who I've worked with my whole life. I know they're not going to screw me over.
Right.
Who are you going to pick? Pragmatically, you're going to pick the guy you can trust the most, because it falls on you if it's not right.
Me having you on my show is a form of nepotism. I know you, I trust you, I bring you back because I know you're not full of shit. Am I gonna go I know other PSYOP people. They're not here, right?
Because they're not here,
They're not here because I know you. So is that nepotism or is that professionalism? I don't know. I don't care. I want Boone on here because I like Boone, and Boone does a good job. The other thing I was going to say to that is when going back to the American thing in that dossier, right? When we see that businessman or whatever, and we're like, oh, that person knows Putin. Of course they fucking know Putin. This is one of the most known people in the world. Elon Musk knows Putin. I mean, how many people know Putin? A lot of people. He's a very important person. And so when we say these things, I know as a collector, when people say, oh, that guy's tied to the Taliban. Yeah, of course. Mullah Omar lives down the fucking street. He probably knows Mullah Omar too. I don't care about that. I care about their actions. We have to allow people's actions. And people are allowed to become better people. People are allowed to say, you know what? I was pissed off at the Russians my entire life. Remember, I was a Russian before I was a Ukrainian, right? I was forced to be a Soviet by birth. And then they left. And I'm like, all right, it's going to be hard, but us Ukrainians are going to get together. And we got fucked with, and we got fucked with me. And finally, Putin crossed the line, and I'm done with it. There are a lot of Ukrainians that fall into that boat, and they're like, fuck the Russians, fuck Putin, fuck them guys. I want to be the greatest Ukrainian ever, and I just want to spend the rest of my life making money, making sure Ukraine's taken care of. Show me those people. Show me the people gathering those people who are too old to go fight and shouldn't be fighting, because what they do is they make money and they make things and they can make Ukraine great. I bet there's nobody gathering. Would you be surprised at all, Boone, if there was nobody gathering those people?
Of course they are. Of course they are. And the people who are in a country, who know what to do in that country, are the best people to run that country, because they have the knowledge and experience. I wouldn't want to take an oil and gas company from the United States who knows nothing about anything and put somebody in charge who's an American and stick them over there and say, okay, make it work. First of all, you don't know how things work over there.
Right.
There's a different flow. There's a different flow of how people get things done. And if we don't, again, we made such a huge mistake in Iraq when we got rid of everybody who was in the Ba'athist Party, who could have done a lot to help that country just because they were in the Ba'athist Party. And Americans don't realize that it was like this. Either you were in the Ba'athist Party or you didn't eat or you got killed.
Right.
If you had skills, you were either in the Ba'athist Party or you didn't eat or you got killed. So it was really, okay, that's how people survived. It was a matter of survival. And for us to demonize everybody in the Ba'athist Party, I just say, okay, what would you do in the same situation?
So my question to you is there, I believe firmly there's nobody doing anything differently in Ukraine. There's nobody going out and collecting the best businessmen and women in Ukraine and saying, hey, we're going to let these people go out and do what they do. We're just going to leave them alone. I think the opposite is true. I think they're taking the best business people and making sure they get the fuck out of Ukraine.
I think they're collecting them, but not to put them to work. I think they're collecting them to try and figure out how to get rid of them. Either way, they're being identified. Is what I'm saying. Yeah. They're being identified.
Yeah.
Or they've already been identified. Yeah.
Yeah. To the detriment of Ukraine, right?
To the detriment of Ukraine. And it would be like that again. It doesn't matter if it's Ukraine, it doesn't matter if it's Iraq, Afghanistan. It doesn't matter. It's the same thing. It's the same. Patton got a lot of shit for letting the Nazis stay in charge of the public works after World War II. But he's like, hey, we got to keep the lights on or this place is going to go off like a fucking Roman candle.
Trains run on time, don't they? And we're like, you know what? Our rockets go up.
Yeah.
Yeah, man, I know. It's a crazy thing. And look, maybe we're wrong on all this stuff, but prove it. Like it's opposite of what we have seen, right? Like, why did we screw Afghanistan up? Well, we didn't make the government ever work. I didn't have to go out and find the Taliban. We were worse. We said, hey, we're going to stand up this government. And I'm like, I can't see the government working. I got government people, like they can't get budget money to show up. You couldn't make budget money go from Kabul to Kandahar out to Zabul. Couldn't do it. So don't tell me there's a government. Yeah, you have people that are trying to be employed, but nobody's paying anybody.
I remember I get called into, because as a PSYOP, you work as a battle staff officer too, regardless of your rank. And I got called in this meeting at I forgot where it was, but it was like everybody's head shed was there. And it was like, okay, what are we going to do? How are we going to start breaking things down so we can get out of here? And we were talking about public work. We're talking about all the sweat stuff, right? Sewage, water, electricity, and trash. We were talking about the government. And my little sergeant ass raises my hand. I said, well, what about the corruption? And I basically got told, I got nothing. We're not dealing with that part.
Yeah.
Okay. We're not going to deal with that part.
All right. So more powerful than your sergeant ass, because I got one of those sergeant asses too. And I would raise my hand all the time and I'd say, hey, are we allowed to talk openly in this meeting? Because you know what the answer to that question is. They're like, yeah, of course. And then I fucking took a boom, give it to them. So I'm just going to give everybody an example. I would go into, there's this thing, it was an evaluation meeting. And they would say, okay, we're going to evaluate the Afghan government and where we're going and how we're doing and just assess everything, hospitals, schools, all that stuff. So everybody just sit down and we're just going to go through everything and it'll be several hours. So everybody get ready. And then, any questions before we start? Oh, yes. Pete, yes. But are we allowed to talk openly in this thing? Or we just all kind of just nodding our head and saying everything's good? No. We're evaluating. Okay, Pete, go ahead. Where are the Afghans? Whoa. It's a classified meeting.
Hold up.
Why is it classified? It's their government, man. And they're like, what are you talking about? You can't have the Afghans in the Afghan government meeting. So with that in mind, right? What would you have us do? And I mean the U.S. What would you have us do differently right now from this point forward? What would you have us do differently? Boone is talking to President Biden. Like, I need your help. That's my Bill Clinton.
Yeah.
I don't want to do Joe Biden because it's not fair. He's old. So, but Joe Biden's people come to you and say, "Boom, Joe wants one thing from you that he'd like you to improve." What do you want the U.S. to do?
I would say we need to recruit the people who are indigenous to that area to do the job that needs to be done best for that country, but also securing U.S. national interests. I don't think we bring in people from outside. I think that's just going to be taken down. And I think there needs to be one hell of an IO campaign of the populace on what to expect, how things are going to happen. Establish very clear timelines so people know what to expect, so they're not always in the dark and they're working against the government that's trying to be set up. Those are two things right off the bat.
What do you want to do about these dargon oligarchs?
They're the best man or woman for the job. You know, you got to figure out a way to recruit them and get them on board, not ostracize them. And I think too quickly we ostracize them because of their previous associations. We need to be very, very attractive to them so they can do their job, but we can also maintain U.S. national interests.
What makes you think that would work?
Because that's what works. I mean, at the end of the day, fuck, dude, that's what works. You know, if we would have done that in Iraq, you know, instead of just this blanket, no, we're cutting them off, we're doing our own people, we're doing our own thing. We've already seen what doesn't work. So I'm trying to say, let's try something different and then see what works. And I think.
And how many times did you and I walk into a factory, a farm, a plant, and they're like, "Hey, the guy that used to run that, he's in fill in the blank country," to include the ground. And the guy that used to run it, who didn't know how to do it, and he left too.
Like, they were always in Syria.
Times?
Always in Syria.
Yeah, always in Syria. Always in Jordan.
Yep.
Yeah, always. And they were not coming back. They're like that.
Because they were targeted. They were because they were Baathists. They were Baathists. So I think that's a big issue. You know, we've got to lay something on the table that says, okay, whatever has happened has happened. You're the best person for the job. You can do what you need to do to rebuild that country. You understand the inner workings, but we also have a U.S. national, interest involved, and it's X, Y, and Z. Can you do X, Y, and Z? Yes. Okay, we agree. And then you got to watch the fruits of their labor. If it's good, great. If it's not, well, then you deal with it at that time. But you've got to put the right people who know how that country runs, how those people act, all their social stuff, all their political stuff, all their business stuff. They would not be oligarchs if they didn't know how to do what the fuck they do.
Love that. All right, you get audience with Zelensky, and he's like, "Hey, man, I get a bunch of people with all kinds of ties and letters behind their names, but you're a no bullshit guy. I heard about you from Pete. Pete brought me some ice cream, so I trust Pete. What do I need to do?"
In what capacity? To win a war? To help their people rebuild the country after the war?
I'm losing control of this war. There's so many corrupt people around me. How the fuck do I get control of this thing?
Well, what is pulling your people away to be corrupt? Because we have to work on the centers of gravity first of all, and then that will pull them right to you. Get rid of the centers of gravity that are causing them to be corrupt, and then that'll pull them right to you because they got no other game in town.
So you're telling me to kick the U.S. out? And all that money. You got to have that money. I like it. All right. And then same thing, but this time you meet with Putin. What are you going to tell Putin?
To win the war?
No, just like, what's your advice?
My advice all the way around is I'm going to tell Putin, first of all, you're not going to live very long. And I know your hopes of reestablishing the USSR are very big. You want to do that before you die. It's not going to happen, but you care about your reputation. So let's talk about reputation. Let's talk about how you want to be seen when you die. Because if you die in the middle of this war and it gets lost and you didn't do anything to create some sort of capitulation, you're going to have an issue for the rest of eternity. And I don't think you want that.
Nice.
That would be my line of persuasion for Putin.
Right. What do you want? What do you got for me? What do you want to ask me? I've beaten you up for about an hour and 10 minutes here, man. And I appreciate it. You did awesome. And thank you. Everything I needed you to do.
I just want to know why you're bringing Zelensky ice cream and I'm not getting any.
I say, hang on, stand by. Where's my Amazon throne?
Send that ice cream over to Boone. No, man. I enjoy doing your show because we get to talk like guys. I do a lot of interviews. I do so many interviews, but it's rare I get to talk to someone, who's a friend, but also, we hold each other accountable, and we
Yeah.
test each other, and people get to see that. They get to
Yeah. Yeah.
see that, and I think that's positive, because that's a big difference. This is as close to we can get it. This is as close to as we can get the physical domain, being one on one with a video. But it would be
Yeah.
the same thing if we were sitting across each other,
Oh, for sure.
at a bar. And
Yeah.
so we've got to get back to that physical domain. Stop, as people, stop relying so much on the technology. Talk to your neighbors. Your neighbor's not your enemy. And at the end of the day, I think there's a lot of dissension that's trying to be sown within the United States. It's not good for us. And so I would just want to tell everybody out there that, there's a lot of strings being pulled in our own country. And I know we're focusing on Ukraine and other places. But, let's look at our own street. Let's look at our own block. Let's look at our own communities, and really have a concerted effort to do something and be active right here at home to help each other live a better life.
When you and I first met, it was electronically, but we were talking, and look, I have a soft spot, but I have a critical spot for PSYOP people, just like I do for spies. And I was talking to you about this guy that I knew in Iraq. He was a governor, and it was a big lesson for me, because you don't know these lessons until you learn them in real life, because this shit ain't in the book. And we were doing a terrible job with IO, a terrible job. And we sat down with this governor, and we were going to tell him about all this stuff we were going to do with this program we were going to do for him. And we had this messaging stuff. And he said, I don't, we had built up trust with him, right? I knew to do that. And the commander I was working with knew to do that. And so we built up trust. And he's like, I don't want to do that. I don't want to do that. Do you guys mind if I show you what I want to do? And we're like, oh, no, please. Yeah, show us. So he reaches down and he pulls out this poster board of his vision, his professional poster board.
Right.
Of his vision of this park with this ancient arch that was from his area, the Stephen Arch, which is like a world UNESCO site if we fucking gave a shit about it. And he's like, this park needs to be this. And he went on for like half an hour, and he pitched us on this entire thing. And he's like, so I don't want any billboards talking about like a future of Iraq. I want them talking about this. And I have this message, and I have this image, and I want this poster board in that thing. And he's like, and I thought I was the governor. And we're like, you are the governor. And he's like, well, then I want that up in that fucking poster board. And the colonel said the coolest words ever. He said, Nam Sadie, which means yes, sir. And I'm like, holy fuck, my mind just got blown. And so I told you that story, and you're like, yeah, that's what's supposed to happen. I've told that story, and I know you'll agree with this. I've told that story to a bunch of PSYOPers, and they're like, he doesn't get to decide that. And I'm like, no, sir, you're wrong. You're wrong, and so you got it. And I was like, Boone knows what he's talking about, because it's not us, right? And you said it. It's these oligarchs, it's these holy men, it's these farmers. And if they say, go that way, we fucking go that way. And even if that way doesn't work, we don't say to them, you go that way. We go their way, and we see what happens, and we learn from that. That's what we do.
If you can get the buy-in, and there's nothing that they want that's against the U.S. national objective, you're going to do so much more. You got to work with the populace. You got to work with the people. I can't tell you how many people in Solder City that literally just showing an ounce of compassion. I mean, look at it. The militia is showing up, murdering them and torturing them on a daily basis. Yeah. And you want to go in and throw your weight around? What do you think you're going to get? You're just going to get people who cower and don't work with you. So understanding the people and understanding their wants, needs, and desires, and then using that to satisfy what they're trying to do to get what you want to do is always the path. It's always the path.
Always. There's already human butcher shops, and I mean literally human butcher shops in Solder City. So don't offer that. Offer something else.
Yeah, they want a future. They want to see their kids do well. They want to see, I mean, like every other parent in the world. And so if you kind of key in on those human things, you're so much better. And yeah, you're right, man. I've seen them, and it's bad. And when you see those conditions, you're like, okay, well, how hardcore am I going to be? How much influence am I going to have by trying to push people into a corner? I mean, I'm not going to cut their hands off. You know what I mean? Right. I'm not going to do the things the other people are doing. So you don't have any leverage there. So you got
Now,
to
what
go
am I
the
going to
other.
do? Scream? Am I going to scream at you? Come on. You know what I'm
Yeah.
going to do? I'm going to rub your back, and actually, I am going to bring you some ice cream. I'm going to take the biggest shake I can find. I'm going to bring him on the American camp, and I'm going to treat him like the badass he is. Like, hey, you're a badass. Let me get you some food. You want to come meet me on my camp? I'm going to treat you like I'm not going to search you. I'm just going to bring you on the American camp, and I'm going to treat you like a VIP. And I'm going to start there, and I'm going to change that fucking dynamic, and it works every time.
I tell you what, I think one of the most effective things we ever did when in Solder City was there was this guy who was, you go to the jails, you work in the jails because there's no militia in the jail, right? It's everybody
Right.
else that's in the jail. So it's a good target audience who's willing to report and spread message. And I'm out there doing my thing, and I'm talking about freedom, and I'm talking about how, the future and everything else. And I said, who here is brave enough to say what's really going on out there? And nobody ever did anything. Nobody ever said anything. You have to kind of get them one-on-one to have that conversation, but not in a group. And this one guy raises his hand. And I was like, oh man, you just signed your death warrant,
Yeah.
Like, what am I going to do now? So we pull him, long story short, we end up breaking this guy out of jail, like literally breaking him out of jail. And I end up, it's a long story, but at the end of the day, I give him $20. And I said, I want to see you on my base tomorrow. And this dude showed up on the fob to find me. And I couldn't believe it. They called me in my hooch, and they're like, Sergeant Cutler, yeah, we're down here, gate, blah, blah, gate 3. The guy says he's supposed to see you. And I said, outstanding. So I go up there, and I take his phones from him, and I quickly tell the guy, hey, write down all his phone numbers while we're over here, And I took him, and I did an interview with him. He was willing to go on camera, interview, and talk about all the corruption that he had witnessed in the major crimes unit all over the place. It ended up turning into an investigation against me, but it worked out okay. At the end of the
I
day,
figured something bad.
it ended up turning into an investigation against me. But the information that this guy was willing, because he showed an element of bravery. And here's the crux of the whole story. I got to tell that part before I tell the other part. It was probably 6 months later, same thing. Sergeant Cutler, you got a guy over here, gate 3. So I go out there, and it's the same guy.
Oh, wow.
And he came back to tell me that he had moved. He was living in a new area. His life was good. And he said, how can I repay, the whole my neck is yours thing, which is a phrase they say in Iraq. And they mean that shit. My neck is yours means I owe you my life. And he says, I owe you my life. I can't go on with my good life until I repay you with my life.
Yeah.
And now that's a quick story that makes you feel good and everything. But just imagine that one guy, how many people he talked to in his life and said, the Americans saved my life.
Yeah, totally.
That's real PSYOP. That's real PSYOP.
Now teach 10,000 people how to do that, operate in that way, Yeah. Not be like, they're not allowed to do that. It's like, don't do that. Anyhow, listen, it's Friday. Go hang out with your kids. Have a fun time. Have a great weekend. Everybody else do the same thing. Anything in closing for me?
Nah, brother, man. I just love you. I'm glad to be here.
Likewise. I'm going to roll these credits.
Hey, thanks for watching the show. I really appreciate it. Right here, you can subscribe. Please do that. It makes the show grow. Hit that notification bell so you know which incredible guest is coming up next. Down below is the PayPal link. You can put a small subscription in. That is an enormous help. All that money goes right back into the show. And then right up over here are the next episodes you should listen to. Curated